Hi everyone, welcome. In this video we want to talk a little bit about what it means to do philosophy. Now I'm going to assume that for most of us we're coming to this for the first time, and chances are you haven't taken a philosophy course in high school. So it helps, I think, to just start cold and see, kind of go from there. Now when we talk about philosophy, what I want to point out in this video is that there's actually a kind of pattern or a method for reading the book, and I think that you'll find that can be really helpful. But I also want to say right up front that this may surprise you, but I don't think that I could actually give you a definition of what philosophy is right off the bat. And perhaps we can explain why that is as we go. But for now, I think it's best to kind of talk about how it's done, or the ways that it's done. So when I do philosophy, I like to break this up into 4 steps. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. First of all, what is the question? So whenever we read a philosophy text, we really want to try to understand what's the basic question or the problem that's being asked. I know that a lot of times people think of philosophers, they think of them like people standing on a street corner with signs saying, I don't know, the end is near, or cogito ergo sum, or whatever, right? But it's not like that. You can even think of the slogans or bumper stickers that you think of when you think of philosophy, like I think, therefore I am. People often think that's the philosophy. The philosophy actually begins earlier when we have a question. And believe it or not, I think, therefore I am is actually an answer to an earlier question. That question actually is, what can I be certain about? What can I know? So whenever we're doing philosophy, the philosophy is always motivated by the question. Next, once we found the answer to once we found the question, next we want to answer the question. What is the basic answer? We can also call this the philosopher's thesis or their viewpoint, but we can usually find that, right? So we want to look for those 2 things first. Now the next part, though, is we could think of it this way. The viewpoints don't just sit there by themselves. We need to give reasons for them. And so that's going to take us to step number 3. What are the reasons that we gave in answer to the question? Okay. And then finally, we have our own space, and this is step number 4, and we always want to do this. We want to make space for critique or comment or assessment. And this is where we bring ourselves into the discussion. So we've listened to the question, we've heard the basic answers, we've heard the reasons. Now what do we think about it? And what we think could depend on, well, do we like the question? Could the question have been framed better? Do we like the question but we're not satisfied with the answer? Also, what reasons are given for this? Okay. All of these things, so for instance, you could say that you like the answer, but you really don't like the reasons. That's always possible. Another thing that can happen sometimes is you don't agree with the answer, but the reasons given for that answer happen to be really compelling. What do we do then? Okay, and I want to point out here that although this process is often critical, it doesn't need to be. We can often say we're trying to be helpful to the writer even. Now next, I want to talk a little bit about the problem that we were working on today. So you watched the video where we talked about the discussion of the Ship of Theseus puzzle. And I'd like to show you right now that it has essentially, that discussion has basically the same 4 steps that we've already looked at. So if we apply the structure, we're going to see that in that problem, we've got a problem, right? And the problem in that case is what makes something the same over time. And in this case, the video that you watched has the ship. What makes that ship the same? Is it the same? But in class discussions, we often talk about a car. Same problem. Could it, what makes that thing the same, if it is? Well, next we move on to the answer. And so in this case, the answer, right, you could give a lot of different answers. So same function, right, having different parts means it's different, that kind of thing. We also give reasons for this. So for instance, you could say, well, it's not the same. Why? Well, the reason is whenever you change the parts, you automatically change the thing's identity. You could have also answered differently. You could have said, well, I think it's the same. And you say, why? And you say, well, as long as the same function remains, the identity remains. So that makes it the same. Right? There's a lot of different ways this can go. Finally, then, we bring in our own step, which is the comment section or the critique section. What do you think about it? Right? Are you persuaded? And of course, keep in mind, it's always okay to change your mind here. Right? That's fine. Now, finally, I want to talk about some shortcuts, if you will. If you like, sometimes they're called hacks. Sometimes it's one thing for me to tell you that really we're going to learn philosophy by doing it, and I say that it's an activity, and it's something we're just going to have to practice as we go. But some students often want a kind of shortcut, right? They don't want to go through 6 months of learning to learn something. It's like, give me this thing as quickly as possible. And that's okay. So I want to give you some hacks, or at least some, I guess, big picture items to think about as you're doing philosophy here. So first of all is something that I call the two sides of philosophy. Okay, so if somebody asked me, what's the most important symbol in philosophy? If you wanted a symbol to wrap it all up, and I would say that symbol would be the question mark. Right, and we've seen that already. I think questions are super important in philosophy. Now, that won't do, though, because it's not as if we just ask questions, right? So we have something else. And so if someone asked me for the, say, second most important word or symbol in philosophy, very simple, it's the word if. And the word if stands for what if. Now, what if stands, if we think about, we ask what ifs all the time. What if it rains tomorrow? What if there's an earthquake? What if there's traffic on the freeway? What if there's no traffic? What if school is online again next semester, right? So what ifs are all around us all the time. But when we say what if, this can function in a number of different ways when we're doing philosophy. So, for example, we can sometimes pose what ifs to help us ask questions. We saw this with the ship of Theseus problem, right? We say, well, what if you had this ship and you could replace all of its parts with parts that look and feel and perform the same? Okay, or what if you did that with a car? You can ask what ifs about people as well. What if I changed my parts, for instance? What if I, got a new arm or a new hand or something like that? Or what if I get like a bionic ear or a bionic eye? Okay. So what I like to say here is that the what ifs, the great thing about philosophy is that philosophy has this kind of dreamy, creative side, right? When we ask what if, it's a bit like science fiction. We're saying, right, anything goes, really. We can imagine lots of different possibilities for things. Okay. So with that in mind then, I have a third word or phrase or symbol for philosophy. And that third symbol, we'd say for every if, there is a then. Okay? And then, I'm going to say, is short for so what then. So, and this is, I'm going to say then, the two sides of philosophy, right? You have the if side, the what if side, the dreamy side, the creative side. But then you also have the so what then side, right? So we could say, for instance, what if you had a ship and you changed all of its parts? Well, then you get to ask, so what then? Well, then does it follow that if we change the parts, the identity automatically changes? What if we keep all the same parts but somehow keep the color? So what then? Then does it mean that color is what was most important for determining what that thing is? Right? So I'm going to say the then side, this is often what I would say is the critical side, right? The cautious side. We can ask what ifs all day long, but then on the other side, we always have to ask, okay, what follows from that? If that first thing is true, what else is true? Okay. Now, finally then, I want to give you one more hack to think about when we're doing philosophy. And that hack comes in this form. When would this conversation ever be over? Right? We've had a debate, and you're going to see this in the discussion boards in the classroom. Right? We're going to talk about this question. But when would the conversation end? Okay, and I want to leave that for you to think about, because I think answering that question is also going to tell you something about philosophy, and it's actually something kind of unusual. I think you see that in other fields, oftentimes we answer questions and we can kind of finalize them. I'm not sure that we can finalize things in philosophy the same way. Okay, and that's a kind of interesting feature of all of this. So for now, I'm not going to quite answer the question, when is this conversation over? But we'll talk about this in the discussion forums and in the classroom. Okay, I think that does it for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.